everyone. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's program is part of the Presidential Primary Sources Project, and our program today is the Unexpected Presidencies. It's being presented to us by the Harry S. Truman Presidential Library and Museum and the Lyndon B. Johnson Presidential Library. We have Sadie Troy and Sheila Mehta joining us. The Presidential Primary Sources Project is a collaboration between Internet2, the National Archives, and the National Park Service. It is a free series presented every year from January through April. This is just a quick reminder that by participating today, you are agreeing to be recorded and archived. We keep records of our programs on our YouTube channel so that students and teachers can access them later. Right. Go ahead and share where you're joining us from in the chat. If you would like, you can also be on video. If you're interested in being on video, just leave a message in the chat and we will get you seen. Teachers and students, we do encourage participation today. So please pull up that chat box and enter any comments or questions there. This is the easiest way to ask questions today. We want you to participate because interacting during our session is more fun and the learning experience more valuable. We ask that you be respectful, though, of our interactive tools. We want to make sure any questions we're asking or any comments we're making are directly related to our topic being presented. Okay, well, thanks for joining us today. We're glad to have you. This is our website if you're interested in more information about our program or looking for links to our recordings or any other information. Okay, with that, I am going to go ahead, stop sharing, and let our presenters take it from here.
Thank you so much, Robin, for that introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Looks like we had a couple people just join us again. So my name is Sadie Troy. I'm the education specialist at the Harry S. Truman Presidential Library Museum.
And I'm Mehta. Oh, I'm jumping in, Sadie.
Sorry, look at us. We're already doing
good. We're like so excited to be here. I'm Sheila Mehta from the LBJ Presidential Library and Museum in Austin, Texas. Okay, take it away, Sadie.
Well, I was just going to introduce you as one of my favorite colleagues to work with. So that's you did a great job. But we have some people in the chat telling us where they're from. If you've just joined us, go ahead and add in also. Because we currently have Maryland, we have Michigan.
The states are representing right now.
Yeah, I'm in Missouri, right in Independence, Missouri. So we got
Texas and Tennessee. Okay, the T's are coming.
We got
California's
Texas,
here.
we got Tennessee, California. This is so exciting.
Oh, we've got North, South, East, and West here. This is a cool group.
I know. We're almost on all the continental time zones. It's so exciting. What a great day to talk about history. Well, I'm going to share my screen with you because Sheila and I have a really awesome presentation that we're ready to show. And please do interact with us in the chat. We have questions that we're going to throw out as we talk. And then we're also happy to answer your questions if you have them in the chat. Our plan is to talk for about 45 minutes with room for questions. So keep those coming in.
But also, Sadie, if I can take a second, if you have questions as we go along, put them in the chat. We want to be able to answer those for you. So that could be something, if it's specific, I will be hopping in the chat answering some of those. Or if they're great for the whole group, we might actually pause and take your question for everyone. We don't have to leave it till the end. So ask away if something is, not clear or you have a particular interest in something we're talking about.
And shout out to Vermont, who just added. Right. We got Vermont here too.
New England's here.
Excellent. Well, as we switch gears, in case you didn't see us long enough, here's another picture of us for you. And as you saw, we're going to be talking about unexpected presidents, right? With Harry S. Truman and Lyndon B. Johnson. But we have a question before we start it off. kind of defining that unexpected presidency. And we wanted to see what you guys know. So type in the chat, what presidents left the presidency unexpected? So what presidents are kind of part of that president's club where they left the presidency unexpected?
Okay, Sadie, can we talk about how the first answer, I know, I see it in your face, blew our mind, but also is so right. But okay, Sharp Homeschool, you already have impressed us because we thought we had the list, and we need to talk about George Washington in a second. I feel like we're starting off just being awed by them, huh?
We
Playing
are,
with
because
Lincoln.
we were thinking of presidents that resigned or maybe died in office or were assassinated, and we thought we put together the most this is why I love doing presidential primary sources, is
I
because
know.
all of these, you students are amazing and have these insights into our history.
But can we just stop? Because we're not going to talk enough about George Washington and acknowledge the brilliance of this answer. Everyone else, like, spot on. Y'all have fabulous answers. We have Harrison and Kennedy, FDR, and Lincoln. But Washington was like the game changer because nobody expected him to just peacefully leave office, right? The idea before America, the United States of America was a country, it was part of England, and a king served for life, right? So when George Washington, after 2 terms, said, I'm paraphrasing, I'm done, we need to turn the power over to someone else to lead the nation, that was shocking and unexpected, and honestly just didn't factor into our presentation today, but is absolutely brilliant.
I love that connection.
Me too.
Yeah, so you guys like are starting off strong because our
I
list,
know.
if I wish I could like sneakily go in there and put his picture in, because we have the list. We put together a list of 9 presidents. All right, so Sheila, you ready?
Let's go.
All right, so the first one on
Ooh.
our list is William Henry Harrison. And Adams Academy, you were right? William Henry Harrison. He leaves the office. He actually died in office. And Vice President Tyler jumps in to take over.
Who's up a fun fact? Do you think they know how he died?
Oh,
Because he's a different one than everyone else. Just a little bit. Yeah, Emma's right. Illness. He caught like the flu during his inauguration. He was out there giving his speech. Yeah, pneumonia. Good job.
That's right. He was so excited to talk to the people as president that it ended up being his downfall.
Mm-hmm. So cold.
All right, Sheila, you read this list for us.
Okay, the next one. Mr. Zachary Taylor. Or sorry, Tyler. No, wait, you just said Tyler. I'm getting all torn up here. So he passes away because of, this is a regal picture, because of disease too. He was sick. And who comes into office? Boom, right there. Very different looking dude, although similar poses, non-military. We have Millard Fillmore who comes in. So he takes over from vice presidency to the presidency because of this illness.
And I was going to say, fun fact, he might have the best name of all of our presidents, Millard Fillmore.
Millard Fillmore. It's a solid name. It's a really good name.
Solid. All right, this one. We had multiple people in the chat call out Lincoln. And yes, Lincoln is our very first president who was assassinated while in office. And so the unexpected step up is Vice President Andrew Johnson.
Yeah, this is going to be a game changer in history. Yeah, we're going to fast forward just a little bit further into history, but not too much. James Garfield is going to be in office, and he too was assassinated. We see a string of very tragic events happening. And in comes Mr. Chester Arthur. He takes over. That is some facial hair. That should have been bigger, just an homage to his facial hair.
Well, and his fun fact is he may have the best facial hair of all the presidents.
I mean, it's a matter of opinion, but I think, Sadie, you and I are on the same page with that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Go for it.
Here we have President McKinley. Again, unfortunately, another president who was assassinated while in office. Um, and so his vice president actually takes the oath of office in Buffalo, New York.
Mhm.
It's so unexpected. He's not even in Washington, D.C., and that would be his vice president, Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah, he's going to be a game changer too. It's so interesting how these unexpected deaths are going to cause some like complete change in trajectory for the United States. So we're going to go into the 1920s now, and Warren G. Harding is president during that time. 20s are known for being, wild and rambunctious, though Harding is very calm, very reserved. Unfortunately, he's going to pass away due to actually a disease in his stomach. It's really kind of sad. But what will end up happening is, while we just talked about, like, presidents that are going to change their trajectory, we actually see some consistency when Vice President Coolidge becomes the president after Warren G. Harding. Yeah. It's known as Silent Cow.
Yes. Now,
We're going to
some of
skip.
you are looking at, I'm sorry.
Oh, please go for it.
Oh, well, I was going to say we're going to jump over the next president who passes away in office because we're going to talk about two of them in a minute. And so we're jumping all the way to the president that actually Leela got. And this is Richard Nixon. So this is the fun fact: the only president who resigned while in office. So he left the presidency very much still alive,
Mhm.
and was uh, um, oh my god, my mind just went blank. Anyways, his vice president Gerald Ford took over as president upon that resignation, and so that is kind of another big game-changing moment for the presidency. But there are two unexpected presidents that we didn't talk about because we may be a little biased, but we think they're two of the best ever in American history.
A lot of
Right?
bias. We're not a
We have
little
a
biased.
lot of
Just say
bias.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So the first one, again, that was called out in the chat as a president who passes away in office. We have Franklin D. Roosevelt. And he had been president. He had been elected 4 times. He was in his 4th term as president, and passes away from a brain aneurysm. And who should replace him? But the strong and stoic Harry S. Truman from Missouri.
Yeah.
Right?
Unfortunately, we're going to see a string of tragedies in our modern era. And while after him, Eisenhower will take office. And then, as several of you have pointed out in the chat, President Kennedy was one who unexpectedly left the presidency. I would say he's probably one of the most well known to unexpectedly leave the presidency. And part of that had to do with the very public nature of his assassination when he was on tour in Texas. And so oddly enough, a Texan comes in. That's actually the reason he was on tour in Texas, was because he was checking out Vice President Johnson's home state during this tragedy. And then Vice President Lyndon Baines Johnson will become president of the United States. And these two share a very interesting history. While they were kind of just like barely passing one another in their political careers, they end up having a lot in common. And not to ruin it, should I say it yet, Sadie? Go ahead and
Let's
say it.
give them a taste. Give them a taste.
Okay. They're going to develop a very unique friendship because of the uniqueness of both of them taking office. And we're going to dive into that a little bit today. So a little bit unexpected presidencies, a little bit friendship talk.
Yeah. And Sheila and I got this idea to do this presentation because how many of you out there watched the most recent inauguration, right? So our country just had an election. We just had the inauguration of a new president that came. And so we saw kind of what happens when that inauguration is planned out, right? There are speakers, politicians come, family of
Grand.
the presidency is there. It's this very grand ordeal. But for President Truman and Johnson, because as vice presidents, their presidents passed away, their inaugurations looked extremely different than the ones that we see. Truman actually takes the oath of office inside the White House. He's in the cabinet room of the White House. It's on April 12th, 1945. So it's not in January when most presidents take that office, right? So he takes it in April. And these are the only people who were there to witness. You can see Truman right in the middle, and standing in front of him is Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. It's Harlan Stone. Truman actually got the phone call that the First Lady of the United States, Eleanor Roosevelt, wanted to speak with him. He was over at the Vice President's house, and he walked across the street, and that's when Eleanor Roosevelt met him and broke the news to him about the passing, and it was time. Truman had only been vice president for 82 days. He had only met privately with FDR twice in that time. So it was a very hard time. I always like to point out, you can see standing right next to Truman is his wife, Bess Truman. And by the look on her face, do you think she's excited to become first lady, or do you think she's very nervous about what's to come?
Yeah, put that in the chat. Describe Miss Truman's face.
Looking at her face, do you think she's excited for the time that's coming? Or
Emma said nervous.
Yeah.
That was a good one. Oh yeah, Adams Academy. A lot of people said nervous. Yeah.
Yes.
Really somber. Yeah.
That's a great way to describe it.
I think somber is a good one because it just kind of downplays the emotions that we don't really know. Although Plain View said unexcited. She definitely does not look excited, does she? Although at the same time, to be fair, it also came at the time when the president passed away. So it was very sad as much as it was unexpected, right? So there's a lot of different emotions.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to point out because the photo here also shows it. When we watch the inauguration of, recent presidents, it's a celebration, right? But here in these moments, it's a new beginning, but because of a tragic end.
Right. And so you can see here, I mean, look at all of the faces in this picture. And this is the very tragic, oath of office for President Lyndon Baines Johnson. Well, Vice President Lyndon Baines Johnson as he becomes president. This happens on November 22nd, 1963. Again, the same day as the very tragic death of President Kennedy. He is shot while touring through Dallas in a open air convertible. And once he's rushed to the hospital, they realize that there's just the worst has happened. Everyone gets together. They actually have to find a judge to come and administer the oath of office because they're not in DC and they can't call up the Supreme Court. And it has to be a federal judge, someone who works for the national government. Recently, the Kennedy administration had just appointed the first female judge ever, Sarah Hughes, and she just so happened to be in Texas and close by. So somebody they just appointed to that position is the person who is going to come and deliver the oath of office for Vice President Johnson. And you can see, can y'all tell me in the chat who the two people next to Johnson are? Sarah Hughes is the one in front of him in the polka dots. All right. Do you know who's to his left and his right? You might recognize him. Yeah, Adams Academy recognizes Jacqueline Kennedy there in the pink closest to us. Do you know who's in the left in the yellow? This might be harder for some non-Texans, but you're right, Emma. Emma said his wife. That is Lady Bird Johnson. So obviously they were there with him on tour in Texas, and then all of the other political officials, both from Texas and for the government or the national government too. And this oath of office is taken on Air Force One, right? So very unconventional location. And you can see just the concern, I would say, if I labeled it, the concern on everyone's faces there.
Well, and Leela said that too, saying that they look shocked and somber, right? You can definitely tell, because Kennedy was in great health, right? FDR had been sick throughout the years, but Kennedy, this was such a shock and surprise.
Yeah.
So what we want to do for the rest of the session is really look at what was the path for these two, because both of these individuals, now President Truman, now President Johnson, they signed up to be vice presidents, right? They signed up for an extremely different role and all of a sudden have to take on this new challenge, right? This new challenge where they are stepping into the role of people who are extremely popular. FDR had been president for 12 years, right? President Kennedy was one of the most exciting speakers of the time. He was extremely popular within the country, and these two would kind of have to take on the role. How many of you out there have ever been considered like the underdog, or have ever had a challenge you're not sure how to face it, right? Like a challenge that people are wondering, like, can you do it? Like, are you able, like, to do that? How many of you have ever had that kind of underdog feeling placed upon yourselves? Yeah, Sheila, me too. Me too.
It's really common, especially when people don't know you as well. Then how do they know what you're capable of, right? With Truman having only been in office for like 80 days, people knew him from Congress, as we're going to get into, but they didn't necessarily know what he was capable of as a presidency. Vice President Johnson, now President Johnson, was actually really known for his congressional career, and he actually ran for the presidency against Kennedy in 1960, and so more people did know him. It was also an office he was more inclined to serve in on his own merit. But still, was he able to be the president since he didn't get the nomination of the Democratic Party? That's what we all have to figure out now is, can these two individuals rise into this unexpected presidency, and what got them to this point to be not only serving in the role, but capable of serving in the role? That's what we're going to explore.
Yeah. And so we'll kind of go back in time even before for both of these guys. I think you might notice there's going to be a little trend where Harry Truman and Lyndon Johnson, they tend to serve some of the same things at the same time. And we'll see what that transforms into at the very end of their lives. But here, even before being vice president, Truman was a U.S. senator for about 9.5 years. So he had a lot of political experience. It just wasn't in the executive branch. It was in the legislative branch. So as you can see, he's elected from Missouri. Whoop, whoop. There's another class here from Missouri. I saw it. I'm not the only one. Missouri's also represented with Mr. Matthews' class. So he's elected and spends 9.5 years working on various committees, understanding the kind of functions of the law, how bills are passed. His big kind of role in the Senate, in the legislative branch, was during the beginning of World War II. Truman served, he actually headed his own committee in the Senate to investigate how the military was spending money, and to make sure that we were effectively spending money. And throughout the 2 years, he not only represented Missouri in Congress, but this time on the committee took him to military bases all over the country. He was visiting other people, visiting the staff within our armed forces, learning about their roles and their equipment, and then putting his plan together on his findings. And he ends up, kind of the big thing that makes him popular is his committee found ways that the U.S. could save 11 billion, that's with a B, $11 billion on their military spending. And at a time when we're in the middle of World War II, this was extremely beneficial for the country.
And $11 billion back in 1943, right?
Great point.
That's even more now. It's wild. It's wild. Kind of estimate about 20 times that amount is about what it would be today. Bananas. Absolutely bananas. That's some savings right there. Also, I don't even want to talk about where that money came from, because holy moly, right? So Lyndon Johnson, if you notice the timeline set up next to each other, they actually serve in Congress together just a tiny little bit. There's a little bit of overlap. Lyndon Johnson was actually a big fan of President Roosevelt. And so this is what's going to bring their paths to cross when Truman is out of the congressional scene and into the vice presidency. And so you'll see that he actually starts very young. He serves almost 20 years in Congress. He's the youngest Senate Majority Leader to ever be selected by the Democratic Party. And he is known for actually working across the aisle. For those who might not know what that term means, it actually means working with Republicans and Democrats to get legislation passed. And so he is well known. He's known for working with everybody that he can to get legislation passed, but he's also known for serving on the Armed Services Committee. So a little bit similar to Truman, and that they have, a military background. Though I will say, LBJ's service was limited to World War II. Truman's service was in World War I. Of course, they're serving in Congress during major wars, so they're all serving in a different capacity. But he's going to look at the future. If you notice, when Truman's looking at how to save money, and when LBJ is serving on that committee, he's coming in a little bit after. So now that they've saved money, how do we continue to be a powerful military at the end of World War II? As the Cold War has set on, the space race is going to happen. President Johnson's going to be a big advocate for that. He sees that as the future. So there's a lot happening in our congressional space for both Truman and LBJ as they're serving their times. But their time in Congress is only a tiny little bit before they find their ways into new offices.
Yes. So we have this question for you all, because it's their time in the legislative branch that gets them seen by these individuals, FDR and Kennedy, and it's their recruitment that makes them vice presidents, right? It's their time in the legislative branch that makes them popular picks to be vice president. So vice president is the next role that we're going to talk about. But before we do, we want to ask you guys this question. Why is the role of the vice president so important to the president? Or why is it not? I think that's a good way.
Like, go either way.
Yeah, is the role of the vice president important to the president? And if so, why?
All right, Plainview came in with that spot on answer. In case the president dies, right? We have now what is known as the presidential line of succession. So it's the next person to take office. So it's not too chaotic of who serves. We see a lot of countries who don't have that order. They don't know who's going to be next to serve, right? So that's a good answer, Plainview. How else? Think about the roles that they might play. Oh, Plainview's coming in with that. It's like they knew I was going to ask the question.
I
Their
know.
answer was a sounding board for ideas. So yeah, we're going to see the vice president and the president working together, running ideas past each other. It goes both directions there. And so, is this a good idea? Who's it going to affect? Adams Academy is coming in actually with a follow-up to even make that answer even stronger. They give advice to the president, right? So if they're a sounding board, the ideas that they're offering, their opinions, their thoughts, their experience, right? That's a really important. Okay. Any other ideas?
Yeah, keep them coming, because I think they, like, all of these are great reasons. Yep. And as Sheila said, like, it is extremely important. And it was a defining role for both Johnson and Truman. Truman was selected by FDR. Even though FDR had been president for 3 full terms, Truman's only asked to be his vice president for the 4th term. And so he's selected. It's in 1944. He wins. They become vice president, right? You think everything's going to be great. But again, they only met twice, right? They only met twice because, as you can see, World War II was going on. And FDR actually kept Truman outside of a lot of those decisions. But Truman was gaining experience on leading the fight, not only just working to support the military and Congress. Now he was in the executive branch, right? They're kind of in charge of leading the military, working on helping to restore the economy. So he's working on FDR's plans. But as we mentioned, it's for 82 days. So it's not even 3 full months. So it is less than 3 months that he serves as the vice president. So it's a very short role.
Yeah. And Senator Johnson, when he comes vice president, he actually serves for about 3 years. So it's a very different experience that he has. He is the vice president. He is actually almost finishing up that entire presidential term when President Kennedy is assassinated. So he is, traveling all over the world as an ambassador during the Cold War, as, foreign policy liaison. He's attending all the things that a vice president often will. He believes in President Kennedy's agenda and what they were looking for in their administration, civil rights, being tough on, communism during the Cold War, really trying to make sure that Americans have fair opportunities for that American dream, and really just improving the United States. And so while this is happening, it's not dissimilar. Again, like I said before, LBJ loved President Roosevelt, loved his agenda, wanted to continue it. That means when Truman continues it, we're going to see a lot of similarities, but they're serving in two very different times, even though it's only about 20 years difference, which I know seems like forever of a difference. It's really not. And so we're going to see, again, I feel like I'm like ruining the story.
I know. Well, we got to see what comes next.
Okay. We'll just continue on.
Okay. All right. So then comes their presidential era. All right. Right. We already said that both Roosevelt and Kennedy tragically pass away unexpectedly. We mentioned that Harry Truman takes his oath of office. It's in the White House. It's on April 12th. I remember thinking about his wife. She's nervous. She's somber. And so now it's Truman's job to continue the fight in World War II, right? So Truman has to decide not only how the United States is going to fight World War II, but how the United States is going to end World War II and what the ending of World War II is going to look like. And one of the things that we're going to talk about that really bonds these two is that idea of when you take on that role, going from vice president to president, how do you balance running the platform that your first president had, but still make that your own, still live up and put in your own ideas and your own solutions. And so that's what Truman spends his presidency doing. He's president for just under 8 years. So he serves out the rest of those 4 years, and then is elected in his own right in 1948. And what he does is he still works towards Franklin Roosevelt's platform of the New Deal, but he updates it. He puts in his own, what he learned from the legislative branch, what he learned about the country, and his ideas about how the country can be made better, how the U.S. now in this role as a superpower within the world can work with other countries to keep international peace, to make sure world wars don't rage out again. So he's working with the platform from Franklin Roosevelt, but he's trying to find new ways to put in his own thoughts and ideas. And you can see he updates the New Deal to the Fair Deal. And so that's working towards the fight for education, the fight for healthcare, middle class tax cuts. He's working not just after ending World War II, now he's looking at, so how do we keep that peace? How do we work with other countries? How do we build up Japan and Germany that we were fighting? How do we build them into allies to help bring their country back up with an economy, with schools, with healthcare? How do we help fight against communism and that spread that wants to put other countries down? So he's really kind of putting in his own personal experience and making it his own.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things with President Johnson is like the Kennedy platform and agenda, what they wanted to accomplish in office, and the Johnson want when he comes in are actually very similar. to the point that Johnson is able to harness actually the sadness of the nation. They're grieving and they're mourning Kennedy's death. And he said, let him not have died in vain. Let's continue our efforts for civil rights, for economic opportunities, and actually takes this idea of civil rights and makes it bigger and apply to all Americans in whatever way it might be needed. So we'll see racial, economic, age. There's all sorts of different ways. And so he'll continue what President Kennedy has started. He's been working on it for 3 years. He's going to continue that. We're also going to see something that has started under the Kennedy administration, which is the conflict in Vietnam was boiling quite a bit, and it's going to boil over when President Johnson takes office. But what's interesting is when President Johnson, the day he takes office, so we saw that picture of the oath on Air Force One, right? The first thing he does after spending time with Jacqueline Kennedy and making sure that President Kennedy, returns to Washington, D.C., that his family is notified, is he actually picks up the phone and calls the three living presidents, President Hoover, President Truman, and President Eisenhower. Unfortunately, President Hoover, he couldn't hear anymore, so it was really hard to have a conversation with him on the phone. Now President Johnson speaks with his son, and he was like, "Well, I'd love to talk with him, but I mean, you can't really talk when someone can't hear, right?" And so he was, to be fair, President Hoover was very old at that point. President Truman, he calls and they've worked together kind of in passing, never really had a strong relationship, sometimes wasn't good when they had a relationship. In fact, President Truman really didn't trust LBJ too much, and I'm okay to say that. It's okay. I mean, LBJ was a politicker, Sadie. I can understand.
Okay, well, I'm
That's
glad
a reflection of LBJ, not of Truman, not of Truman. But I mean, President Johnson was a character. I get it. I get it. But he picks up the phone and says, "So I'm kind of part of the President's Club. I need all the help I can get." And soon, President Truman and Johnson realized just what similar positions they found themselves in the day that they took those oaths of office. And President Johnson will call President Eisenhower too. He gets his counsel, his advice. The President's Club is very small. There's a total of 4 of them, including Johnson. Hoover can't hear, Truman's there, Eisenhower's there, and Johnson just took over. And so what ends up happening is President Johnson and President Truman end up becoming really good friends because President Johnson realizes how much wisdom President Truman has to offer, that they're going to both have these unexpected transitions, that they have to lead a nation in mourning the loss of a very beloved president, whose life was taken way too short and in the middle of a term. As I mentioned before, like there's not a lot of them. So who do you lean on who's done the job? Especially like the hardest job in the world, I can imagine, right? You have so much riding on this position. They've both are come from the South. They have similar perspective, but they're also not the majority opinion in the South. President Johnson wasn't liked by a lot of Southerners because he was a Republican, or he wasn't, a Southern Democrat. He was more of the Northern Democrat, but he was still Southern, right? And President Truman had the same thing. They had a lot of people who loved him. They had a lot of people who didn't love them so much, and they politically disagreed with them. They're both facing this growing international conflict. We really didn't touch on the Korean War yet with President Truman, but we did talk about World War II. So they are in the middle of all of it. And there's really only one other person who understands what that's like. And you can see from the picture in front of you, it's going to be a cute friendship.
it is, and they're literally leaning on each other in
Yep.
that picture, which I really, really love. And it's so true. Let's see. What's the next slide?
Sadie, why don't we tell them this and then I'll tell them a couple of those fun stories.
Okay.
Okay.
That's great.
We have time.
Yeah, because
Okay.
I mean, I was gonna say, this just reiterates those connections that they had. And for Truman, it was really special to have President Johnson call, because remember, Truman didn't have anyone. He didn't have someone close to him or another living president that he could reach out to that had been through that unexpected change. Truman does have a relationship with President Hoover, but President Hoover um, had kind of what we term that regular inauguration, right? He had that experience where he was fully elected. He succeeded because he won the election. He had the big celebratory inauguration. He doesn't have this kind of big, shocking change. And so Truman knew he had that experience that would be helpful. And kind of, how many of you guys have ever, been the friend you wish you had, right? Be that person, that support system that you wish you had when you were going through a hard time or something where you're not sure what's going on. And so it is those connections, because as you can see, we talked about it, they both had that legislative experience. So they both knew Congress and being in the executive branch. They were both knowing what it's like to be at the head of a political party and have your party talking about what agendas they want to pass and what they want to work towards, right? And then, of course, you have both presidents being president during war times. And decisions about war were very important because Truman and Johnson knew, were they the soldiers who were strapping on boots and heading into combat? Was Truman going to be that person? No, he knew, both of the presidents knew that they were sending other people. They were sending American citizens into harm's way, and what that responsibility meant and how seriously they took it. And so these are kind of those unexpected roles that both of them had to figure out. And because of those connections, leaned on each other.
Yeah.
And what does it turn them into?
It turns them into unexpected best friends.
Best friends.
So we're going to do this twofold. I'm going to talk about like how similar they were able to help each other and how really Truman was able to help Johnson. You could argue that Truman laid the foundation for Johnson to be successful. You can see that right here, and we'll talk about it in a second. And then, Sadie, I'm going to talk about you know what? I'm going to surprise you with what story I'm going to tell them. Hold on. It's a good one. It's my favorite story about these two, which you can obviously see from these pictures. They're adorable, right? Don't you want to hang out with these two? I do. I want to be that guy in the background just hanging out with them.
Do you think, students, do you think if we put this on an album cover, do you think if we made this an album cover for an artist, do you think you'd buy the record? Would you buy the record?
The Cool Glasses and Hat Club.
Yeah,
I love it, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, that's really fun. We love it. I would buy it, and I don't even know what music it would be, but I'm here for it. Play it. Let's see what's going on, right?
Yeah.
And so here's what's so interesting about these two, and it's actually kind of shocking that they weren't friends before Johnson takes the presidency, because they really were similar in their backgrounds, as we just talked about, similar in the roles that they take on when they become president. But if you look at actually what they wanted politically, they actually wanted the same things. Like if you look at the list on your screen right now, so Medicare, being able to provide healthcare for Americans, President Truman tries to get this passed through Congress, but Congress didn't want to pass it. He just didn't have the support in 1945. But fast forward 20 years later, when LBJ is in office, and he's able to actually get it passed, almost the same law, because he now had Congress on his side, because Congress had changed, right? There was a lot of elections between 1945 and 1965, and he was able to do what Truman started. And he gives Truman the credit when they go to, when President Johnson goes to actually sign the Medicare law, he goes to the Truman Library and actually signs it there, because without President Truman starting this in 1945, Johnson would not have been successful. And so he takes the show on the road, so that he can honor President Truman in that way. President Truman starts the civil rights movement at that national level by desegregating the military. And then President Johnson, what he's most known for is passing the Civil Rights Act, right? In 1964, and then 1965, the Voting Rights Act. And so there's a lot happening. Again, what Truman starts, LBJ is able to take to a whole different level, because time has passed, Congress has changed, American ideas have changed too. We're going to see this in housing. Both Truman and Johnson want more Americans to have access to housing that they can afford in places where they live. So they're going to try to change the laws that allow people to come and afford housing. So it's something we still struggle with today because times change, right? And then education, two things that Sadie and I obviously love as educators ourselves. We love that our presidents love it too, is they're trying to make education more fair for all students like you, right? They would love to know that we're, zooming from Missouri and Texas all over the nation right now. They would just
Yeah.
they'd probably look exactly like they do in this picture right now. Happy to know that we're able to do this because they fought their entire presidential careers to make these things a reality, that all Americans have access to great education so that they can achieve this American dream. Because they both realized how crucial education was to being successful as adults and in the United States. Now, my fun story. So these two become such besties that when President Johnson is elected into his own presidency in 1964, he actually calls up President Truman and invites him to stay at the Blair House, which is usually where the incoming president stays before they're inaugurated and before they move into the White House. But since President Johnson's already there, he invites Mrs. Truman and President Truman to come and stay there. He essentially invites them over for a sleepover, y'all. He's like, hey, you come over and stay in the Blair House. I know you know it well. You bring anybody you'd like, and we're going to see you on Inauguration Day. You let me know what I can do for you. We'll send Air Force One out for you. Y'all, can you imagine two presidents essentially having a sleepover? I just need that mental picture right now because that's what it says. It's the cutest phone call. He's like, well, you just come on out now and you stay at the Blair House and we're going to see ya. Bring anybody you'd like. We'll take care of you. And they had this like inauguration sleepover. I'm here for it. I'm just saying.
I'm so
Besties
here
for the
for it.
besties.
I'm so here for it. And with that story, this is a really great time because maybe Sheila can tell us another little story about how they're best friends while you guys type in the chat. If you guys have any questions that you want to, we're kind of looking at, we've hit 45 minutes. We want to make sure we've been asking you guys so many questions. You've been awesome at answering them.
Yeah.
Go ahead and type in. We have some time left. What questions do you have for us about the presidency, about our presidents, about their relationship? Oh, wait.
I was going to say, you have some like final brilliant thoughts, Sadie.
I know, but let's do questions first.
Yeah. Okay, so Plainview is asking, did they hang out after their presidencies? So when President Johnson leaves office, did him and Truman hang out? Do you know, Sadie?
The answer is yes.
Yeah, they absolutely did. Unfortunately, President Johnson is only living for a few years after he leaves the presidency before he passes away, and so they didn't hang out too much. President Truman is actually going to pass away before President Johnson does, but they actually pass away really close to one another, and the entire Johnson family goes to the Truman funeral service. But yes, they did hang out a couple times, but unfortunately, they won't be alive terribly long after Johnson leaves office. So
it's actually, and Sheila, correct me if I'm wrong, but President Johnson's, and when he's retired, his last public event that he attends is Harry Truman's funeral, correct?
That is correct.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he does come together. And were their wives friends? That's a really great question. And they were. I mean, they weren't as close as having sleepovers, but there was a lot to bond over for them as well. Neither of them really expected to be the First Lady of the United States. And both of them had children, or had children growing up while they were
in the
First
White House.
Ladies. And so they were living in the White House. They were living in DC, trying to raise their families whilst being thrown into this national role. And I can tell you, First Lady Truman, she did really like First Lady Johnson. They were close, but she hated being First Lady. She did not, President Truman's wife, Bess, did not like the spotlight. She wanted it all for her husband, and she tried to avoid it as much as she could.
Whereas President Johnson, Mrs. Johnson, Lady Bird Johnson, actually, while she didn't love the limelight because she just wasn't used to it, she embraced the role that, while she was first lady and, the second lady when she was, when President Johnson was vice president, she was always President Johnson and Senator Johnson's number one cheerleader in council. Like she really was there to support him and he supported her. They respected each other so much. And so they actually had a really good, both personal and working relationship. It's interesting. And she embraced the first lady position. So she just stepped right up and flourished in that space. Even though if you look at her personal background, she hated public speaking. She actually had to take theater classes to get herself out of her really calm shell that she was in because she just didn't like it. But that served her so well when she got into college and then became Mrs. Johnson, because never would they have known that she would be first lady. And so, yeah, super, super cool there. And Sadie, we have a really great question that just came in too. It seems unusual for these two to be buds. Does this happen a lot with presidents? Yes and no, actually.
Right. Yeah, yes
Yeah.
and no. I think that's a great question.
It is a cool one. Yeah. Do you want me to take that one?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, at least start it.
Yeah. So a lot in the history of the presidencies, no. And part of that was because people didn't live very long. And so
Yes.
they didn't have a lot of chance to really get to know one another and to be friends in that way. But more recently, you do see presence because people live longer. You do see them be a little bit more reliant on each other, much like LBJ and Truman were, for the very reason if they understand what it's like to be in that spot. And you see that both during their presidency and after their presidency. The hard part is while they're in the presidency, they have their own political agenda, what they're trying to accomplish. And that might differ from what the previous presidents had wanted to accomplish. So we do have that difference of opinion and difference of political perspective, but it doesn't mean they don't help them. A lot of time presidents will actually seek out the former presidents to get their advice on particularly major national and international events, because there's not a lot of people for them to go to. It is actually known as the President's Club. I know. Interesting things we learned today.
I like to hope that they have robes or jackets or something that they
I
can
hope they
wear.
have jackets. I want them to have like, like high school jackets, like varsity jackets, but it
Uh-huh.
just has like USA on it or something. I don't know.
There's
I
a
don't
big
know.
eagle on the back.
Yeah, so that's all red, white, and blue. Okay, we don't know that this is true, friends, just so you know. We just
But
want the
and I will say too, I think it's a lot more common in recent presidents
yeah.
for them to have these relationships, but mainly because earlier in the presidency, along with the presidents not really living very long after just because of lifespans, um, politics was very different. And so the presidents would retire.
Mhm.
Or they would have to go back to jobs that they worked before because there was no social security. They didn't have retirement pay. So there were other jobs they had to work. Whereas in modern times, presidents who kind of end their presidency, right, and either are not reelected or they've done their 2 terms, they stay invested in politics and they stay involved at a much higher rate than before. And so those relationships are can be a lot closer in those partnerships.
And you
So
see that interesting relationships too. Like, it's very well known that President Obama and President Bush, the most recent one, actually have become friends. And part of that was because Michelle Obama became really good friends with President Bush, not Laura Bush, President Bush. They became unlikely best friends too. And so, like, the four of them have become very close. Again, very different political opinion, but that similarity of experience. And so there's actually a really adorable picture of President Bush and Michelle Obama like hugging each other. That's really cute. And then we have President Bush's dad, Bush, the 41st president, and President Clinton also became pretty close after their presidencies. Again, just knowing what each other went through, understanding the office, still staying engaged in politics while they're around. And now most presidents get along fairly well. You saw quite a bit of that when President Carter just passed away, how many of them came out and were talking about not only his service, but the person that he was, the person they got to know, way more than just the president. And it's really nice to be able to see those presidents look at each other with respect and admiration, but also as friends. Yeah.
Absolutely. These were awesome questions. We have
Well
two final
done.
questions we want to throw out to you all as we've been talking about presidents and vice presidents and kind of to recap and gain your thoughts. So John Adams, who was our very first vice president, who becomes our second president after George Washington unexpectedly steps down. Great callback on reference on
Shout
that.
out.
But John Adams once said that the vice presidency was the most insignificant office. So when he was the first one that had it, he called it the most insignificant office. Do you agree or disagree with his thoughts? Like, do you think that's still the case? That do you think that it's still the most insignificant office?
Mhm.
Hmm?
Adams Academy has come in with an answer. We're looking for more. I'm not going to share theirs yet because I don't want to sway anybody
Yeah,
else.
and as you're thinking about that too, you see there is a second question we're going to ask. So if you want to think about that too, as we're get ready to read these first answers, Truman and Johnson, they may have had that unexpected bump from vice president to president that they weren't ready for right away. But how did they step up to it? How did they make the presidency their own? How did they, even though they weren't on that ballot as the president the first time, how did they turn it into their own? How did they make it so that it was important that they were in that role?
You kind of step out of the shadow, huh, Sadie?
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. That's some great answers. So we have a lot of folks saying that the vice presidency is very important because we see things like, unexpected deaths. Honestly, some of them are disease, assassinations, leaving office, those types. So we have that. There's also that the vice president is the head of the Senate, so they have a very important job there.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
I like the one too where someone said that the president does a lot, or the vice president does a lot of traveling now to like kind of to visit other places and to step in.
LBJ did, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I like the way that Adams Academy answered the second question. So go ahead and answer one of them, both of them. Go ahead and keep those coming, friends. They said that Truman and Johnson not only followed through on their past president's agenda and honored them that way, but they had some new ideas to put into action, all to make America better. Well-formed idea. Good argument. Yeah.
Adams, you just made our whole program. Like we should have just had you present Adams Academy. That's a wonderful answer.
Well, they're now like presidential scholars, so that's pretty cool.
They are. They are.
Awesome. All right,
well, thanks all so much. Robin has popped back in because we are just about ready to get the boots because we've talked to you all for so long. But this has been so much fun. Thank you all so much for talking about two of our favorite presidents of all time.
Yeah, and thank you for your brilliant ideas. We appreciate you being bold enough to share them, and so that we could read them and learn along with you. And we might actually have to update our slideshow to include George Washington now. Thank you for helping us to learn. We love that part.
Well, thank you, Sadie and Sheila, for being with us this afternoon, or this morning, sorry, and presenting. If you guys are near these libraries, go to for a visit. And if you're not near, please check out the resources that we sent out with the email yesterday. I'm sure they would love to help you. We appreciate you all attending today's session. We thank you for your participation and your thoughtful questions. I, in my short time here, have loved seeing questions pop up in the chat. I think it's so encouraging and so much more educational when that happens. And again, thank you presenters for your time and an amazing presentation. We really do appreciate it. And we will see you soon. Have a great day.
Bye, friends.
Bye, everyone.